It's always in the news. Cybercriminals attacking great organizations, wreaking havoc on the trust of their brand.
We socialize cybersecurity for you to raise awareness.
Interviewing leaders who built and protect great brands.
We help talented people enter into this incredible field, and we share our research at blockbuster true cybercrime stories.
This is Cybercrime Junkies. And now the show. Well, good morning, everybody. I am David Morrow, host of Cybercrime Junkies, and in the studio today, we've got a great episode. We've got identity and fraud protection expert Ayelet Biger, and I apologize if I just mispronounced your last name, but I think I got your first name right. We're going to discuss a whole host of things like identity protection, best practices. Here's some stories, talk about fraud prevention, and kind of learn how to keep ourselves secure, our families, but even equally as important, the organizations and the brands that we serve in our day job. So Ayelet, welcome to the studio. Explain to everybody what your current role is, and then let's back into kind of what's driven you to kind of get there.
Sure. So currently I'm in the process actually of starting a company. I'm working on something new in the area of online scams. I recently launched a podcast called Scam Rangers.
Yep, and we're going to have links to that in the show notes. So check out that podcast. You've got some really good guests on there that kind of walk people through ways to protect themselves. It's good. It's how we found you.
Exactly. The goal is to really take the perspective of the victim, because often when we talk about fraud controls, and I'm sure we'll cover that today, we talk about the financial institution or the merchant or the e-commerce company and their perspective of low false positives, high detection rates, lots of KPIs out there. And oftentimes that part of, but there's a person who's impacted financially and emotionally that needs to be, in my mind, taken more into consideration in the decisions on processes and technologies that are folded into the fraud stack. So the goal of the podcast is to shine a light on the victim's perspective and give more insights and more thoughts about that in the process.
Excellent. And I assume that's available everywhere people get podcasts.
Yeah, wherever you get your podcast.
Great. And then walk us through what your work history has been. Like how did you get to saying I'm going to have a podcast, but not on how to, best ways of cleaning a house or best ways of crafting or best ways of designing cars, or why fraud prevention? Like walk us through what triggered that.
I would love to do a podcast on design, but that's
beyond
me. Anything
more positive. Yeah, a lot more optimistic and positive, but we try and keep cybersecurity positive.
Absolutely. So my journey has been, I started my career at IBM Research Labs, and I worked there as an engineer and a researcher for a few years. And I then left to join RSA Security, where I worked for 11 years. And I focused there on identity protection and fraud detection. So two intertwined areas, but one is more focused on protecting online banking systems and fraud stacks, and the other one is focused on enterprise identity access. There are
let's break that down a little bit if you don't mind. Is that okay?
Sure.
Because people throw terms around all the time, and for those that aren't even, and we have people that listen to this podcast that don't really even they're not cybersecurity people, like they're just business owners, or they are in various professions. So when we're talking about fraud protection, what does that mean as opposed to identity protection? So when you're talking about the identity stack, that's more authenticating when you're at an organization. So for example, when somebody logs in, they're able to actually verify that they are who they are. And with that comes controls. With that comes, you have the ability to see XYZ information, but not more than that because of your role. Is that what that is?
Yes. So when I talk about enterprise identity, exactly, it's authentication, authorization. It's are you who you claim to be? And what are you
Right.
authorized to access? And
Right.
also, what are the tools and systems that we're trying to protect as an organization? So if people still have on-premise applications and then their cloud applications, then really analyzing the environment and understanding who should have access to what are the risk factors based on classification of the data that resides within application, based on the business processes, the risks of the business. So it's not just authentication, it's really taking a holistic approach at the data, the risk, the processes, the regulations, and which users should access what kind of data, especially admins who have kind of keys to the kingdom and have more rights and are considered privileged users. All of that needs to be taken in consideration when deciding and creating multi-factor authentication policies, access policies, and authorization policies. So I dealt with all of that at RSA and
Hmm.
worked with any type of organization really, to determine what their needs are and what solution would best fit their needs.
Excellent. And then from there, what happened next?
So I went back and forth between, as I mentioned, fraud and identity. I actually started on
Hmm.
the fraud side. So I worked as a product manager on a team that developed controls to help financial institutions protect their online banking systems. So when I talk about fraud tools, it's really looking at the specific user's activity within the account, all the way through the account lifecycle. So
Got it.
all the way through the account lifecycle. So from account opening to then the activity within the account, and saying, one, is this user who they claim to be? So is it the
Right.
right user, authentication, login? But in online banking, as opposed to enterprise access, there's a very large concern with regards to friction. How do we make the customer journey, this is consumer accessing, how do we make the customer journey very, very seamless and protect them in a subtle way, in a silent way, where they don't have the notion that necessarily that someone is looking at their device and things like that. So we try to
So you have
collect.
to go through, you start from the seat of the customer and say,
Mhm.
how many clicks is it getting to get here? How much verification is needed so that we can keep them safe, but still not make it such a hassle to use our site that they're going to go to a competitor.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's the concern. How do we balance security with usability for the end users?
Hmm.
And
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges the whole industry faces, right? Is
exactly.
it-
But when it comes to consumers, I think the bar is higher. When it comes to enterprise, absolutely need to balance that and create a good user experience because we want our employees to be productive. But when it comes to consumer, it's also the challenge of, if it's not good enough, they'll go to a competitor.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's a good point. Like an employee might gripe or it might be a little hassle, but they know it's almost a condition of employment. Whereas you don't have that control over a customer. So
customer.
so that has to really, it's a much more difficult challenge. And how do you guys do that? Do you engage with the graphic design team, with the website hosting group? Like how do you guys implement that?
So I would say when it comes to creating fraud controls, there are many stakeholders involved. Absolutely, those digital teams and marketing and everyone, product, everyone who's responsible for the metrics that are customer acquisition and customer retention and offering more products, they're all involved and they're all stakeholders. But of course, we work directly with the fraud control team. So those teams that determine the strategy, it's always a layered approach. And it's always, okay,
Mhm.
how do we create that seamless experience by collecting other elements that are maybe hidden for the user. So not always multi-factor authentication because you want to perform this payment or you want to do bill pay. You can't authenticate the user multiple times in the session. But we all
Right.
know that login protection is not enough. And
Mhm.
even if the user had logged in successfully past multi-factor authentication at login, we still need to verify every point of risk within the online banking session. So in order to do that, we collect other elements that can indicate risk.
Like what?
So again, layered approach. So there, I would say, are a few categories of data that could be collected. The first one, and I think the longest one in terms of the years that this has been going on, that we've been doing online banking fraud detection, is IP intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Is the IP the location, one that we've seen from this user, and other elements of the IP. Another category is device elements, and this can be a range of cookies, device fingerprints, browser settings, language, everything that can be collected. There are a lot of
Because there's a
privacy.
lot that comes with us. When we log on a site, there's a lot that the site can see about us
Right.
and our history and all that other baggage. All of those have elements. And so if there's red flags in there, you want to limit.
Right. So basically, fundamentally, the question we're asking is this the user we've seen in the past, or is this someone
Mm-hmm.
else?
Yep.
So kind of creating authentication through device. And then there's location, as I mentioned. And then there's behavior. What is
Mm-hmm.
the behavior of this user? What time do they usually log in? What
Have
page
they
do they
have they
typically?
never logged in, but now they're logging in trying to withdraw $10,000 immediately, right?
Right,
Like that's a red flag,
right. So looking for behavior patterns that are not typical for this user.
right?
And then there's a whole, so I would call that behavioral analytics.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a category of that's really evolved in the last few years, and also kind of talking about my journey. Then the company that I joined after RSA, BioCatch, focuses on behavioral biometrics, and that is actually looking at the user interaction with the device. So basically, how users type on their keyboard, how they click with their mouse, how they interact with a mobile device to answer two questions. One is, are you the user that we've seen in the past? So kind of that form of authentication throughout the session.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you're left-handed or right-handed, or you type very fast or very slow, things like that that change over time. And
So
the
you
second,
can capture that. You have visibility. I think a lot of people don't realize that. I
you
mean,
can
those that are listening that are in the security field that are professionals probably know that already, but a lot of business owners and regular people probably don't know that.
yeah, and I would say that for a long time it was considered kind of, does this really work? It's dark magic. Can we really tell who someone is based on the way they interact? And I think when you look at something throughout the session and you look at the past, I think companies like BioCatch and other behavioral biometrics vendors have proven that it's very effective. And I would say what in my mind is even more effective is looking at patterns of good versus bad. So I'll give an example or two to explain what I mean by
Yeah,
that.
please. And first of all, what's interesting is that you guys can see that, meaning you can design a website for a bank or credit union, investment firm, whatever, in the finance sector,
Mhm.
and you would be able to capture the way I'm using my phone. Like, you know what I mean? Like, how could you even see whether I'm using my right hand, left hand, whether I'm typing
Right.
fast, whether I misspell the same words over and over, which I tend to do given what device I'm using, right?
Yeah,
But those patterns could easily identify me or identify somebody else if they're not doing them.
exactly. And just to be clear, they are not using a camera or recording that. It's all through the interactions, the common keystrokes, mouse
Yeah.
movements, gyro on the mobile device. So it's
You're not across the street with a telescope and a box of donuts, like zooming in on my phone. I get that, right?
right,
It's more just looking at the data that we're inputting.
right. And actually not the actual content of the data. It's more the pace and the
Mhm.
pauses. So I'll give the examples of how we can distinguish between kind of good and bad behaviors. So for example, when someone is imagine someone is opening a new account with a bank. So what they're doing is they're opening a form, starting to fill in personal information like name and address and social security number and other
Mhm.
details. And they will read the terms and conditions and pause and choose a credit card design if it's a credit card application. So some differences between legitimate users and cyber criminals. So when a cyber criminal opens a new account with stolen information or synthetic ID, first of all, they will know the process really well because they do like 50 or 60 of these a day. So they'll jump only to the mandatory fields, complete the information required, not stop and read the terms and conditions. They'll do it very fluently from a process perspective. However, when they enter the personal information, they're going to use their short-term memory because they're doing copy paste from a list, or they're remembering something and then they're going off screen. And so there are differences in the way people input data if it comes from their short-term memory or their long-term memory. And if it comes from their long-term memory, the typing will be more continuous. There are less pauses, which we'll see in cases of a legitimate user. So those are some examples. So that's the third category. We talked about device, IP, behavioral analysis, and behavioral biometrics. So these are some of the methodologies used for fraud detection.
So where does this element sit in an organization, right? If you're working for a large company, let's say it's either a bank or a system or like one of the three major credit bureaus. Like, we were talking to somebody recently who's in Insider Threat, an Insider Threat group. They kind of sit underneath the cybersecurity group. There's HR, there's legal, there's all of these different roles on a day-to-day task, but they all kind of have the same mission involved. They just have to look at different metrics and different data and apply different standards and skill sets. Where does the fraud prevention, fraud detection arm of an organization typically sit? Obviously, there's going to be exceptions, but as a general rule.
Obviously. So I would say it really evolved over the years. And initially, I think it did sit under cybersecurity. And to clarify, cybersecurity is always a stakeholder in any decision. So they are not necessarily the ones that are going to look for the technology and decide what the fraud stack components will be, but they'll always need to give a thumbs up and verify that this fits the standards of the organization. Typically, because we're talking about customer-facing controls, this sits under either product. So the product, and we've seen a lot of kind of cross-functional teams. It sits either under the product. They have their fraud teams who are dotted to cybersecurity or kind of theirs, or risk. There are also many organizations that have a chief risk manager, chief risk officer, and the fraud team will report to those people. And I would also note that it really depends on the country. The model that I talked about is in the US, but we've seen other countries where it's still directly reporting to cybersecurity.
And that would be the CISO or CIO, depending on how it's organized.
Right.
Interesting. So, a recent National Geographic show, Trafficked, was on last night, and it was talking about, it had our friend John DiMaggio on, and they were talking about how some of these criminal gangs, historically drug dealing gangs like, the Crips and the Bloods and like violent gangs, street gangs, like they're organized, they're very well known, right? That they have been getting into identity theft and credit card stealing and opening and fraud and things like that, because a lot of it has to do with the criminal penalties that are out there, right? Because if they get caught doing that, they might do 5 years in a federal prison as opposed to selling fentanyl and it kills somebody. They get charged with murder and it's in a state penitentiary. So, if anybody knows anything about our judicial system, going to the federal penitentiary for a shorter period of time is much easier to rebound from than a state penitentiary, typically speaking. Generally, there are exceptions, of course. But are you seeing, in terms of the stories that you hear and what you're seeing, who's kind of behind driving a lot of this credit card fraud and a lot of these fake accounts, account takeovers, things like that?
It's a huge ecosystem, and as you say, it's growing. And I think there are a few reasons for it. One of them is what you mentioned: law enforcement, penalties around it. I think our system of law enforcement and tracking, and not to mention regulatory, is just starting to keep up with the craziness that's out there. But as you mentioned, these are organized criminal rings that are well established. I think they see themselves kind of as white collar crimes versus these are not considered violent crimes, although the emotional and financial impact
Oh,
is
it's brutal. Yeah, they.
very brutal, and there are cases of suicide, and
Mhm.
it's so you. I don't know if you can call it murder, but it's devastating, and it's devastating to people like those violent crimes. I think
So,
that
can we
the
go down that path just for a second? Like when somebody gets their identity stolen or their bank account taken, I mean, there's two theories out there, and one is some people don't worry about it because they think the bank is going to take care of them, and then other people are so paranoid that they don't think at all that there's any resolve for them. What is the reality out there? I mean, if somebody takes over your bank account or they file false tax returns, they start doing this, it could go on for years and years, right? It can follow you, it could destroy your credit, your FICO score, which in turn stops you or hinders your ability to get an apartment, rent a car, buy a home, invest, things like that. What are you seeing?
I agree. I think it is a nightmare, and it takes years to recover. And it depends. I'm not going to say that all cases are the same. So
No, of course not.
let's try to organize it a little bit. So, identity theft that results in use of identity to conduct things that will impact credit scores and will apply for false tax returns and all the things that could happen will result in someone having to really clean up and tidy up the mess for a very long period of time. So the best thing to do is kind of to protect upfront, to freeze kids' credit scores in advance so they can not have their identity stolen and credit abused, because I think the challenge is noticing that it happens. And it happens in many ways. It's not necessarily because we're negligent. Maybe there was a data breach for a merchant that we work with or another company. Even an enterprise company that we work for could have a data breach, or the
Oh yeah,
fact.
absolutely. I mean, we talk about that routinely, right? It's why security is all of our responsibility.
Right.
When we have to have different passwords for every single thing that we log into. We have to, because we can't control what when we go if we use the same password, as good as that password could be, if we use that same thing for XYZ site because we're going to go buy something there, what we don't realize is XYZ site will sell our data, which means our name, address, credit card information, the password, the account that we created. They'll sell it to somebody we don't even know about, and then that organization could sell it again. But even if they don't, that third party that we're not even aware can get breached because we don't know anything about that. We trusted the one vendor that we're going to buy something from. And then they have that really good password with our name, our information, everything else.
Right.
And so now it's being used to create a fake credit card and incur debt in our name.
Right. So I think one of the things that people should do is regularly check. And there are sites like Have You Been Pawned to see if
Yep.
your email address was involved in a data breach. There are credit checks that we could do. There are alerts. There are different tools out there that could alert
Freezing
us.
your credit. Would you?
Freezing credit for kids, I would say. You don't want to freeze
Yeah.
your credit because you're using it and you're developing it, but your kids' social security numbers could be leaked and leveraged to create synthetic IDs by cyber criminals. So basically taking a valid social security number and maybe putting different elements of names or misspelling them to then open an account with a synthetic ID.
Absolutely.
And
Well,
then they
shouldn't people can people freeze their credit and then unfreeze it if they're gonna like if they're not currently in process of buying a big ticket item, right? You can still freeze your credit and use your credit cards. You can still freeze your credit and improve your FICO score, right?
that's something that I'm not very familiar with,
Okay.
freezing it while still transacting, but definitely
Definitely for kids, for
you don't need
sure.
it yet, because
Yeah.
even if you're active, you'll see that there are transactions. Again, we need to look at our credit card statements. We need to
Absolutely.
check and see what's out there and get the alerts. So I definitely recommend to be aware and to follow whatever your identity is involved with. But for kids, we don't do it often because we don't
No.
think about it.
Most
So
people don't. Most
I
people
would
don't, right? And they can use that child's identity for 10 years. They take an 8-year-old's identity. They can use that for a decade before
Right.
that child's 18 and actually looking at their credit, if
Right.
at all then.
Now, you talked earlier about people thinking, well, my bank will take care of it or not.
Yeah.
I just want to also mention the difference between the bank's liability in different scenarios. So when it comes to account takeover fraud or even identity theft, if someone steals my credentials and is able to log into the bank account on my behalf, which we call account takeover, and perform unauthorized transactions, the bank is liable and the bank will help. There's a regulation called Reg E, and it drives that liability for banks to reimburse customers for case of account takeover. And that is why banks are creating really great fraud detection platforms, because they're also liable.
Right. They're losing all that money.
But when it comes to online scams where someone is tricking me into transferring my money and I do it and I authenticate and it is me and I can't prove that it wasn't me, in this scenario, the bank today is not liable in any place in the world. There are regulations coming in the UK, by the way, to mandate reimbursement, and they're a hot topic of conversation these days. But that scenario today is not covered. And a lot of people, because they know that the bank will reimburse them for unauthorized payments, they think that they might be covered for scams as well, but that's not the case. It's really
What are some common scams that people, obviously we hear about online dating scams, we hear about um, uh, education scams. There's a whole host, but what are some of the most common that you see?
Wow. So many. They're very, very creative. So there are delivery scams, like your delivery, it could be from UPS or USPS or whatever. Your delivery address needs to be confirmed. Please click on this link. And then you need to pay to get something, advanced fee scams. Now we see a lot of fake job scams. And
Right.
that's, I would say, the hottest topic because there were layoffs and the job market is a lot of people searching for new jobs. And I've heard a crazy story where someone actually thought they applied for a job or they were offered a job at one of the cryptocurrency companies. And they thought they actually went through an interview process and they started to work. And then they were asked to buy something, to go onto the website and start buying something and spending money to buy a computer and different things. And it was all very weird to them, but that was a whole scam where the
They
scammers were
lured
trying
the
to get.
employee in. Yeah, they lured the employee in. The employee started to work, but we need to set up your direct deposit, or we need to we need to have you buy this element that will go with your company computer that we're going to ship you or something, right? Go buy
Right.
this dongle or go buy this personal thing. A lot of our employees choose this. People go and do that, and that's really what the scam was, right? Because now they have
It's
your
multiple levels. It's definitely that. So they pay for something, they give their credit card details, but they give think about all the information we give to an employer. All that
absolutely. They know
personal identity.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's pretty common, and I mean, we also know that on the other end, there's like deep fake uh, scams where
Right.
people are applying for remote jobs. The FBI warned about that last summer, but this is different. This is where we individuals as employees can get scammed.
Exactly.
What
They're
are
also
things? Well, yeah, yeah.
oh, so-
Let's go through some of the other scams, and then I
yeah,
want to hear what people can look for. What are some of the
okay,
red flags?
absolutely. You just mentioned deepfake, and so this is a really interesting scam where someone's social media account is hacked, and that happens all the time because they don't use multi-factor authentication. And data breaches lead to leak of passwords that are used across multiple places. So social media accounts are hacked, and now cyber criminals are actually taking over those accounts and using deep fakes to create videos impersonating the real account owner, saying something like, I've invested in crypto and I've got these gains. So the followers who trust this individual will now believe that they invested in crypto or they did this thing, and they'll buy into that as well. So there was recently a news article about this type of scam as well.
Unbelievable. And what could people look for to see those red flags so that they don't fall prey to it?
First of all, I want to say that it's important to look for red flags, and I can talk about a few, but I also want to say that these criminals are very, very sophisticated, and people will fall for scams, and it's not their fault. So I just want to put it out there that even if it can happen to me and I look at red flags all day, it can happen to you. So I just want to put it out there.
Oh yeah, like absolutely. I mean, we were searching for a car for my son years ago. This was maybe 2 years ago, and there was a great car at a great price. But then all of a sudden, I think it was on like Facebook Marketplace. It wasn't even through a dealership, which is like a huge red flag. But we're like, that's pretty cool car. That's a good price, and it said it was local. And then it was like, I'm in the military. I can't do this. It's going to be somebody else that'll pick it up. And a lot of people, even if it's not a car, a lot of people will buy, furniture to rehab or something like that on Facebook Marketplace. Anything like that where somebody different is going to show up and you have to pay this third party in order to get this, and you have to pay ahead of time before you can actually see the item. Anything like that is a red flag, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And then the next thing is a form of payment. If they want to pay, if you want you to pay through Zelle today, unfortunately, there are a lot of issues with that. And then that's another red flag on top of everything that you mentioned. Someone else will come to pick up is very, very common for these types of scams. So I recommend either cash or some other form of payment where you know that you can see the money and you have it in your hands. And yes, Facebook Marketplace is heaven for scammers. So definitely be more cautious when you're on these common marketplaces.
Yeah, it's nothing against Facebook, the company, or the platform. It's the people that are leveraging it, just like Craigslist and things like that.
Exactly. And never pay a fee to sell something. Like if you're selling something, never pay a fee for it. If you are, I think there are a lot of red flags of grammar there, and a lot of people are saying, well, now with ChatGPT, they'll be able to.
I was just about to say that. Yeah,
they'll be able to create very clear messages. But the thing is, they're doing it intentionally. They're trying to reach those people who will not notice the grammar mistakes. I posted something on LinkedIn a while back saying, is this sloppy or intentional? With a scam that I got that was very kind of sloppy, but it was so, I don't think it's something that it's a grammar mistake by mistake. I think it was intentional, and they want to catch the people who will not notice the grammar mistake. So
interesting.
Like, kindly, sir, you see it's not American English. Don't or think again, maybe. And then some other red flags are if they're asking you to, this is more advanced maybe, to download a remote access tool or to identify with a crypto wallet interface or something like that. And it's completely disconnected from the whole conversation. I would also say that some of the most successful scams today are investment scams, crypto investment scams.
Oh, absolutely. We've had victims on here, and they're very bright people, but a lot of people want to get in the crypto investing because of the great returns, allegedly, right? And there's so many people that have had their wallets just taken, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's really kind of shocking. We have a whole episode on Jerry Cotton, the CEO who created the largest exchange in Canada and had hundreds of millions of dollars, but it never happened. Like he was just taking money in and like giving them fake dollars that made it look like you had Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin transactions had never happened, right? So it
Right.
was almost like a Bernie Madoff thing in the sense that I'll give you this really great report, albeit this time it was online, and it shows, look, your Bitcoin's going up. That's great. So long as you don't ever want to try and get your money out,
Right.
then and only then would you realize this is just code we're putting on a site. You never owned the Bitcoin in the first place. Thank you for your $20,000, right? And
Right. So in the pig butchering scams, they're called. I don't know if
what are
that
those?
what
Yeah.
yours is. Okay, so it's really interesting. They start with relationship kind of scams. So here's the flow. So, and I'll explain why it's called pig butchering. So it starts with a random. Let's say you get a text from me and I say, "Hi, Susie. Are we meeting for coffee?" And you're like, "Oh, this is not Susie. Wrong number." That's
Right.
how it starts. It's always like a wrong number. It's always, I had your contact. Who is this? I deleted my contacts and I got this number. All these kind of
Starts
excuse.
with the wrong number, right? Like
Wrong. And
like
human nature is wanting to help, right? Being helpful. So sorry, it's a wrong number. Oh, you're so kind. Please forgive me for being so messy, whatever. And then you start a conversation, and the other person uses social engineering to
mhm,
start to get you to share personal information. For example, where are you from? What do you like to do? And then you start a conversation with this person that you don't know, but is still relatable to you. They care so much, and then they switch and they start showing you a flashy lifestyle. And you said the people were very smart, but it's people who could have funds, could be very, very educated. It's really across the spectrum of everyone. And what they do, these scammers, they start presenting a flashy lifestyle. Here's a picture of me in San Francisco. Here's a bag that I bought. Here are all these cool things that I have. By the way, do you know how I have them? I invested in crypto.
mhm,
So it's called pig butchering because they kind of fatten the pig for slaughtering, which
right.
is a horrible name, but they really convince the person, and then they start getting them to invest small sums. And then it's what you described. The investment is never real. They start seeing a screen with their investments going up, so they invest more. And maybe even at the beginning, they can pull out some funds. They
Well,
can
yeah,
cash.
and it's very much like the way online ransomware gangs are, and that is they have to build credibility, right? To
Exactly.
make the scam, to get the $50,000 from you, they'll let you invest $1,000, and whoa, look at that! Bitcoin shot up, or whatever crypto you invested shot up. Take your $1,500, you got it,
Mhm.
right? And if
Exactly.
you were smart enough to walk away, you just made money. It's great. But the truth is 95%, and I'm making that number up, but it seems like a lot of people wouldn't because they just did a little. The natural thought is, well, if I do more, think of how much more we can make.
Right. And what we've
And
seen with
that's
the
where they fatten
scams.
them up, right? That's where they're
Right,
fattening up
exactly.
the pig because now they've built trust. Now they believe them.
Right, exactly. And these scams are very successful in the sense that people invest all of their money. And we're talking about, if you're all the scams that we talked about before, the advanced fee or the payment or the delivery,
Mhm,
that's like a few hundreds of dollars.
mhm.
These are hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars. And that's why this is the fastest growing scam, because it's so successful. And the extremely sad story behind the scam is that because it's so successful, the crime rings are trying to get more people to perform these scams. And they can't get so many criminals who want to do this. So they're trafficking people from China to Cambodia and putting them behind barbed wires in these complexes to actually perform modern slavery, which is scamming other people. So they're
Wait,
trafficked.
yeah, wait, what? Like, can you elaborate on that? Like,
Yeah.
these are white collar criminal organizations, right? As
Mhm.
we think about it, right? Meaning they're not physically killing people, right?
Right.
Directly anyway.
Right.
But they are trafficking people from one country to another to do what?
Okay. So yeah, they're and by the way, in episode 3 on Scam Rangers, there's a whole episode on this topic on human
Okay.
trafficking with an expert on human trafficking who kind of really is following this very closely.
Yeah,
So what they're
this is
doing is
shocking. This is
they
shocking.
need manpower, they need person power to be able to scam other people. They need people who will sit on their phones and talk to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so successful that they'll
So
do
they do
everything.
human trafficking to get people to put on their
So
desks.
what they're doing is they're posting on social media sites and through other means, and are convincing people who live in China, even people, who are very educated, and they're offering them jobs and high salaries. So for example, there was someone who wanted to be a chef, a Chinese
Mm-hmm.
person who wanted to be a chef and came to Cambodia to work in the restaurant business, other people looking for different jobs, and people who are caught in romance scams and think that they'll come and meet their loved one.
Right.
When they come to Cambodia, they're actually kidnapped to work in this compound of pig butchering scams.
Oh my gosh.
And they're
And
stuck
then
there.
and then they wow.
And then
Holy
they
cow.
sit for 18 hours a day, 16 to 18 hours a day, and scam people. And you talked about violence. Those compounds are very violent because people don't want to do that. It's not
No, of
only
course not.
being trafficked, it's hurting other people that they don't want to hurt. But
Right.
their conditions are horrible. There's beating, and it's
Unbelievable.
very hard. It's very, very sad twist
So
to the story.
who can, so again, to protect ourselves and our loved ones and our kids as they travel abroad, or our friends and family that travel abroad, we can always, it seems so obvious, except that the social engineering is so persuasive, right? They appeal to what matters to the person. They give the person a little bit of what they need, and they build up credibility, and then they go in basically for the kill.
Exactly.
What organization is tracking down these human trafficking slash scam organizations? Like, who's it? Is that Interpol? Is that, is the US working with Cambodian authorities? Like, how are we going to at least monitor or
Yeah.
contain it?
So there are international organizations, and I will say that the Cambodian government is getting pressure from Chinese government and other countries where their citizens are being trafficked to do more. So they are doing a little, and they are finding some of these scam compounds, but there's also a lot of corruption, and that's why some of these countries were selected to perform these scams. So a lot
So
of these
there's
scam compounds belong to cousins of people who are in the government.
that's what I was
And
going to say. They're being brought to those countries for a reason, because there's either not great extradition, or we don't have good visibility into it, or good collaboration with the current ruling party.
right. And I would say it's not, except for the US wanting to do good in the world, it's not kind of the US's responsibility
Right. I mean,
that perspective, but the victims of these scams are vastly here, mostly in the US and Europe. And I think that is becoming a huge concern.
absolutely.
And yeah,
So in terms of the scams, we've talked about romance scams, the pig butchering scams, the PayPal Amazon account scams. That's pretty common. I would think a lot of people use PayPal and Amazon. What are some of the red flags to look for those scams?
and absolutely just wanted to mention bank scams too.
Yeah,
All these,
I was just about to, that was next on my list, like the bank impersonation, the bank
absolutely.
scams. So let's deal with the PayPal, Amazon ones, and then get to the bank ones.
So I would say whenever you get a message from Amazon, and I know that Amazon, PayPal, they have their apps and they use secure communication channels. So
Mhm.
first of all, a kind of rule of thumb: if something is too good to be true, like the car story you mentioned, it probably is. If
Right.
something looks odd to you, go check. Go check that you perform that Amazon purchase, or that Amazon has put in their secure communications channel a message to you. Same with PayPal, same with any merchant, really, any e-commerce company or merchant that you work with. Go and check in your messages, because they communicate with you in their internal messaging platforms.
Excellent.
When it comes to a bank, I would say always initiate a call to the bank. Don't have them call you. And if they
Right.
do, sometimes the bank will call you and it is legitimate. I just got a call yesterday from the bank and it was legitimate.
Or if
And
a
it was
bank sends you an email with an 800 number,
right,
don't call
exactly.
the 800 number in the email
Right,
because believe it or not, they buy those 800 numbers and they staff those desks. What you need to
exactly.
do is just get online and find out the actual number for the bank and call that number.
Right. Or call the number at the back of your credit card. Exactly.
Right.
Right. And so definitely kind of you make sure that you initiated your proactive. I would say the most fundamental basic one, especially for pig butchering scams, don't talk to strangers. That's
Mhm.
something that we teach our kids from day one. Don't talk to strangers. If you have an SMS from an unknown sender, take a second. All your unknown sender messages should be always suspicious. Try to think about, is this legit? Is this not? If it's a known sender, again, I'm not saying people are not hacked, but also think about it. Contact the person. There's the grandfather scam, which is very, very sad, where they call someone or text someone who's elderly and they say your son is arrested, under arrest, and here you can talk to this person, and then they give them someone who's crying, so the voice is kind of obviously not going to, and the grandparent, and you need to bail them out, and then the
Right.
person's like, don't tell my parents I did something wrong, and just come and save me. And then the grandparent goes to get money and send it wherever they need, etc., etc. And it could be the authorities asking for gift cards. So of course, authorities will never ask anyone to pay with gift cards.
No, but sometimes it's like you have to pay the bail bondsman. So can you and they're kind of,
Yeah,
I mean, it's a little shady for most people that aren't involved in the legal system to pay a
right,
bail bondsman. That's a new experience, at least, right?
right.
And oh no, we hear about that one all the time. Again, it gets to like the neuroscience of it, right?
Exactly, because
Yeah,
a
because
rational reaction would be call the grandchild or
of
call the
course,
grandchild on their phone. But
right.
you don't act rationally because you're terrified. This
Because
talk to them.
they have hijacked your amygdala. They have hijacked the part of your mind that is fight or flight, and it blocks the neocortex part of your mind, which is the part that deals with rational thought. So even though you know better, right, you can't think better until you pause. And if you pause for a minute or two, it biologically lets your mind process a different part of your brain so that you can actually go, this doesn't make any sense. I'm going to go make that call. But that's why there's always a sense of urgency, right? That's why there's got to be a sense of urgency.
Time bomb.
Somebody's in jail, somebody's in the hospital. Do this within 24 hours or within the next couple hours. Otherwise, your account is going to be
Like
uh,
lost.
destroyed. And there's a
Yeah.
reason for that. And it's biological, it has to do with science, right? They've tapped into the fact that we can get otherwise bright people, right? Well educated, not well educated, doesn't matter, but they're bright people, right? And they would normally never do these things, but we can get them to do it if we create that sense of urgency. Something bad is going to happen if you don't act now.
You articulate it in a way that's perfect, because that's exactly why it can happen to anyone. And why am I kind of saying this all the time? Because it's so important for people not to feel shame and to
I
report
agree.
and
Yeah,
to
and I
report.
think that's really important, right? I think that's a good empathetic approach because what we see with these financial crimes is, like you said, people commit suicide. People think, "Oh my god, there's depression that comes from this." There's in the episode that we watched last night, they were talking. They had like 4 or 5 different people that had been taken their identities, and they were a mess. They were a hot mess. Like they were just destroyed emotionally, and it's the part that people don't see. People go, "Oh, it's a few bucks in an account." You know what I mean? We're just taking from the big bank anyway. They'll pay you back. But look at these people's lives were destroyed, and it just destroys their dreams, everything else. Um, really
Yeah.
good stuff. Hey, thank you so much. We're kind of running out of time. Absolutely not the last time we're going to speak because we could go definitely down a deeper hole, especially with some of these new regulations and as we go into some of the more stories. So we'll absolutely have you on again. We really appreciate your time. Anything? What's currently, before we leave? What's on your horizon? What's coming up that's exciting for you?
Oh, a lot. I'm going to launch a new website very soon that will
Great.
allow people to kind of verify if a message is a scam and report scams to kind of help other people. So
Oh, that'll
that's
be great.
first.
When you do, please let us know. And if this episode gets released after that's out, we will have that link in the show notes so that everybody can check that out, because that's helpful. We usually direct people to like scamadvisor.com or some of those,
Mhm.
but having somebody that's practicing this would be great.
Yeah, and this looks at the message itself, not
Oh,
necessarily
great.
the
Excellent.
link. So that's part of it, and so that's a first step, and there's more coming.
That's excellent. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Check her out. Connect with her on LinkedIn. Your links will be in the show notes. And we thank you so much for what you do. Right, like driving things like this. There's a greater purpose, right? And it's for protection and servicing others. And we really appreciate all that you do.
So much. Thank you so much for having me, David. I
No,
really
this is
appreciate
great.
it. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. Our next episode starts right now.
Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's free, and download the podcast episodes, available everywhere you get podcasts.
To support our show and get exclusive pre-release episodes and bonus content, please subscribe to Cybercrime Junkies Prime.
Link in the description and show notes. And thanks for being a cybercrime junkie.